Hi, Candice. Thank you so much
Hi.
for joining my little series.
Oh my
Just to
gosh.
kind of
Thanks for
talk.
asking me. So
Yeah,
fun.
no, I'm so excited just to kind of dive deep in the mental health field and how you
Mm.
support your clients and then kind of how we can work together. So thank you so much
Yeah,
for joining.
of
So
course.
just to kind of get started, I'd love if you could kind of introduce yourself, maybe your kind of path to mental health and just
hmm
your company as a whole as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm Candice Fraser. I have a practice in Georgetown called Green Couch Counseling, PLLC. I also have a podcast called The Couch Next Door. And I always tell people I feel like therapy, mental health kind of found me. I don't really feel like I actually went searching for it. It just sort of
I love
followed me and
that.
I fell in love with it. And it's just kind of an interesting, almost weird way that I got into this profession, but I feel like it was exactly the right place for me to be. So I did a lot in grad school and even getting my internship hours as an LPC intern through the juvenile probation department. I did a lot of work with the kiddos that were detained and then their families, and also working with them in at home therapy, which was really interesting.
Wow.
And I would have never chosen that for myself, but my practicum person, like professor, was like, "No, we're going to put you here," and I loved it, and I loved it, and I kept doing it even after grad school. And so I just realized the need for mental health to be easily accessible, and that like just being able to serve that population and serve those different communities specifically in their homes a lot of times just made me really want to prioritize making mental health accessible for the community whenever I started my own practice. And so specifically the way that I did that, especially in the beginning of my business, was making sure I had evening hours for after school appointments, making sure I was available, when people needed a therapist, because a lot of times that's a really hard part is just the scheduling piece. And the other part that was really important was cost. So, I sort of made that intentional decision that I wanted to take insurance, that there were going to be like certain percentages of my people that I would be willing to do a sliding scale and work with them. I've even had clients that will pay with volunteer hours if that's all that they can do,
Wow. I
just to
love that.
make mental health accessible for individuals and for the community. So that kind of started my passion before I started my business, is working with that population. So, yeah.
I just want to touch on that real fast. I have never thought
Mhm.
of or even heard of that concept of using like volunteer hours.
Mhm.
Just out of curiosity, how did that kind of come to fruit or how
Well, so I had it was during my internship hours specifically. I had a client that I'd been seeing for, I don't know, maybe a year or so. And she lost her job. She had no income. She didn't have any really financial support of any other kind. And so I told my supervisor, I was like, I can't like let her go. Like she was in crisis. Like there was so much going on for her that she needed to stay connected to therapy. And she sort of brought up that idea of what if she volunteered? And so the one of the specific reasons she was in therapy was a trauma related incident. And so we talked about potentially giving back to that kind of work as the volunteer hours. And so, we made up a little agreement. I asked like, could you do this many hours? And that could pay for, 1 hour of therapy. And I think it worked out really nicely. I mean, I can't do that all the time as much as I would love to. I can't live off of volunteer hours,
Right, right.
but it was nice to be able to offer that to her, and for us to be able to kind of collaborate to figure out how she could still stay engaged in therapy, but still be invested, right? Like that, and that was my supervisor's whole point is, well, you can't just give it to her because we want her to be invested in the process. And so, we kind of came up with that idea of volunteering. So it worked out.
That is so cool. I love that idea. I haven't, yeah, like I said, I hadn't heard of that. So that's really, it's
Mhm.
beautiful and it's really just refreshing to meet other providers where you can tell that they just genuinely care. It's not just
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
okay, here's your hour chunk and then we're done and
Yeah.
I'll see you next time. It's like, I care about you. I care about your growth. So that's so
hmm
wonderful. Um,
Yeah.
I love that. And so you work with individuals and couples and families. So kind of
Yes.
the
Mhm.
whole kind of mix. And so
Mhm.
I love that and kind of relating it to Shine, just focus on like parent and relationships
Mhm.
and family as a whole.
Yeah.
So what, while you're working with just these different kind of groups, what are some common challenges that specifically talking about parents that you see parents facing,
Mhm.
and that
Yeah.
they come to you with?
I mean, a lot of things really is, I think the first thing that parents tend to notice is attention in their relationship with their kiddo. And I work primarily with teens. If I see a kid, they're usually 12 or older. So I focus a lot on the adolescence years. Um, and so a lot of times parents will notice a little shift in their relationship with their kid, or they'll notice a shift in their attitude towards things that they once enjoyed, or activities that they maybe used to want to be engaged in. And so that's cause, that's a concern for them, right? Like it's almost like I don't know who this person is that's living in my house anymore. I thought I
Yeah,
did. I raised this person, and now they seem so different. And so, um, it's hard, I think, for teenagers sometimes to say some of those harder things to their parents. They don't want to disappoint them. They may not have the words. And so it's interesting to see me, somebody that's not in their world, kind of come in and just help them to find the words so that, parent kid can bridge communication and kind of find ways that they can connect. Because I think that is a big struggle is you have to start to be open to connecting in different ways than
right.
maybe how they were when they were younger. And so it's really kind of just everybody working together and being open to making some changes and finding different words to communicate how they can connect in a way that actually works for everybody. And usually with the parents, they don't really care. They just want to connect somehow, most
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
time. So it's just kind of finding that common ground.
That's so cool. So would you say the kind of journey to that point is you meet maybe with the couple and then they may talk about just those challenges with their child, teen, or adult, and then do you usually bring in that child or teen if like they're all okay with it, and then you kind of facilitate that conversation with them to kind of talk about their needs and hopes for
Mm-hmm.
it? Okay.
Yeah, so if a family reaches out and they want their teenager to be in therapy, sometimes they'll want to meet with me originally just to be able to say certain things without their kid there.
Right.
Oftentimes, what I'll do is bring the parents, and the teenager in, at least for the first half of the session. Everybody kind of talks about like what are your goals? What do we want to get out of this session or out of the time together? um that's also my opportunity to kind of gauge the teenager's investment in this whole process. Are they here because mom and dad made them, or are they actually somebody that's interested in therapy? And I think that's where like my work with the probation department came in handy because most people
Absolutely.
did not want to be talking to me. I kind of sometimes had to convince people to open their doors so I could come in their house and see them. And so, I know that I have to be approachable. I have to be somebody that I'm not going to use all of these fancy words. Like I'm just like, let's talk about like who are your friends and what's the drama and what kind of music do you listen to? What are the TV shows you're watching? I have to be a person first
Right.
with the teenagers, not a therapist. Like therapist second, person first. Like just tell me about you. And so in that first session, with everybody in there, we'll talk about goals, talk about like what do we want to get out of the session. And I always tell families like I don't want anybody scheduling another appointment with me. I want y'all to leave this session today. I want everybody to talk about what they thought, what this lady had to say, like what do we want to do? And then you have my email address, you have my phone number. Call me if you want to schedule a follow up. I never want anybody in the room to feel like they have to make that decision without consulting with one another.
Right.
So I always make that very clear up front. And then usually in like, sessions are about an hour. If the teenager feels comfortable, then I'll send parents out of the room and that the teen and I will chat for the last 30 minutes. And again, that's also an opportunity for me to assess how comfortable they are with this process. Because if mom and dad want them to come weekly, but they can't talk to me for 30 minutes, like we're gonna have I mean, we can give it a few tries, but at
Yeah.
some point, like we're gonna have to reevaluate, is this actually maybe the right thing for them at this point?
Right. I love that so much. And I love how you like advise the parents or the family, like, hey, take some time to think about it. I
Hmm.
don't want you to just jump right into that. I think that's a great just way to start building that relationship and
Yeah.
saying, I'm not going to push you in anything that like you don't feel comfortable with. So like I want you to think through things. So that's so
Hmm.
wonderful. I love that.
Hmm.
So when if parents maybe parents don't feel like they need therapy, but maybe they're just starting
Hmm.
to kind of like recognize that their child or teen could kind of benefit. What are some ways that maybe if they're not even kind of at that point, but they're just noticing kind of some struggles, what are kind of some uh just ways that you could guide parents or kind of give advice on when they might want to start looking towards therapy? Like what kind of point will that hit?
Like like what kinds of things do they observe in their
Yes.
kids
Yeah.
that would make them think that therapy was needed? Well, it's interesting for different for different people, for different kids, it's gonna look so different. And the thing that I tell parents a lot of times is, your kid better than I do. Like, I mean, and I want parents to feel some confidence in just trusting themselves that if they feel like something is off, then something is probably off.
Yes.
And so I think it's really important for me even to verbalize that to them. Like, I can be the expert in the room, right? Like, I mean, I do this for a living. I've gone to school, all the things. Like, I can be the expert in mental health, in the mental health realm, but you're the expert of your kid, and your kid's the expert of themselves, right? And so I always kind of encourage parents to listen to their guts about that. And I know that kind of sounds a little bit cliche and definitely not scientific. Um, but I do believe that there's something to that, right? Like, I mean, if you've been raising this kid for 12 years and all of a sudden something seems off, then something is probably off. And I don't know that you always have to know what that thing is. I think sometimes just giving them the resources for your teenager and for the family, right? Like maybe just getting some resources accessed can at least help you to start that investigation. And I kind of take that position of just being the curious person in the room. Because again, I'm not the expert of your kid.
Right.
But I can ask questions to maybe help everybody sort of figure out and navigate what could be going on. But I don't ever want parents to look at me as the person that's going to tell them, yes, your kid needs to be in therapy. Because if you think your kid needs to be in therapy, then maybe they do, right? Like that's probably something worth trying.
Absolutely. And I think you just made such a wonderful point because it's not a specific, that's why I was kind of having a hard time wording my question, but it's not a specific just thing that you'll see
Thing,
or something that
right?
they'll say.
Yes.
Like every individual they're just their own individual. Everything like
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
unique. And so they have their own unique way of expressing things. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, I love how you said trust your gut because it's I think the best way to
Mm-hmm.
just give advice for parents on like if something does seem off, then it probably is. And so then that's the
Yeah.
point of when to seek guidance. So yeah, that was
Yeah.
beautifully worded. And so when a parent then decides, okay, I think I do like my child may need some support.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you have any suggestions for kind of things that parents should seek or maybe questions they should ask the therapist? Because I know most providers, especially in the mental health field, will provide like a 15-minute or a 30-minute
Mm-hmm.
kind of consultation period. So are there kind of specific areas that you feel like parents should ask or kind of should look
Mm-hmm.
for um, during that process?
Yeah. Well, I always tell people you take them up on that 30-minute consult or whatever it is that they offer. And I mean, I think good rule of thumb is you call at least three therapists. Um, because, I will admit therapists are notorious for not calling people back. I hear that all the time. So you just keep trying. That's what I say. Just keep trying. Try to get at least three consults just so that you can compare. Um, and I mean, this goes back to like, I think you can kind of know, like, if you click with somebody's personality, it is such a personal preference who your therapist is.
Right.
They may be they may have gone to the most prestigious college and had all of the training, all of the things, but if you don't feel like their personality matches your energy, you're not to say that you can't, but I think initially it's going to be harder to develop that rapport. And it will just take a little bit longer for progress to probably be seen in therapy if you don't feel like there's that connection and that rapport. Because it's going to take a little bit longer for you to feel safe and trusting in that therapeutic relationship. So, I mean, I think first and foremost, just sort of like tap into how do you feel just talking to this person, right? Like, did you feel comfortable? Do you feel like they listened to you? Do you feel like they validated your feelings? Just how did you feel in that conversation? And then secondly, if there's like specifics of, I know for a lot of times people have a specific like faith that they maybe want their therapist to at least come to therapy with that perspective. Or, sometimes people have a specific gender that they would feel more comfortable with. Um, I think too, just kind of knowing how the therapist works, like if you think your kid or if your family is going to do better with somebody that likes to give homework, so to speak, right? Likes to give something for you to do or think about between sessions, then ask that therapist, is that something that you do? Um, if you think that like something that's a little bit less rigid or more flexible, right, is something that would work better, ask them like, how do you run your sessions? Like, what does a typical session look like for somebody, for a client of yours? I think just really kind of asking questions of how does this person work? How do I feel talking to them? Um, you know, obviously, like what kind of specific training have they had, if that is something that's important to you, so that you know their perspective and where they're coming from. Because if you need somebody that works a lot in trauma, but they are mostly, depression and anxiety, they may not have had a lot of training in trauma. And I think that's a really good question to ask.
Right. I love that you touched on that last part too, because I was recently doing a conversation similar to this with a speech therapist, and
Mhm.
one of their biggest pieces of advice was go see someone, or like if you want someone that is specifically trained in something, don't accept if they say they're familiar with it.
Right.
Like
That's
ask if
good.
they've had
Hmm.
trainings, like
Hmm.
what they've been trained on. So I love how you said like if you are specifically looking for someone to help you with trauma or with anxiety
Hmm.
or with any of those things, asking like what kinds of training have you had? Like not just a
Yeah.
little portion within your grad program like 15 years ago. Like what
Right.
kind of training
Right.
have you followed up on? So that was a
Yeah.
huge part. And you also really
Yeah.
touched on it. I view kind of when you're seeking a provider, you kind of are interviewing them and you want to see if
Oh,
it's the right
absolutely.
fit.
Yes.
And so,
Uh-huh.
like, what is your perspective on this?
Hmm.
Or, yeah, you need, that is your time to make sure that they are perfect for you, not the other way
Hmm.
around. Because,
Hmm.
and also, like you said, they could have gone to all of the best schools, been in the best programs, and like basically be like a 10 out of 10 on a piece of paper. But
Hmm.
what really matters is that connection, which is why I love just meeting all these different providers, like
Hmm.
similar to yourself, because I like to just see the personality, see how
Yeah.
different providers kind of talk
Yeah.
talk about things, because different people mesh like best with others. And so you may be able to have a
Hmm.
conversation with someone, but will you be able to build that rapport with them and
Hmm.
kind of be able to listen to them
Yeah.
actively?
Yeah. And I have to, I mean, I tell my clients that call or prospective clients that call, like, look, I'm not super structured. I'm like, I can be, but that's not naturally my thing. So if you need somebody that's pretty structured, then I may not be your girl, and that's okay. Because I mean, I think it's important when people are looking for a therapist specifically to feel empowered, like kind of like what you just said, that they get to choose, right? Like I am one out of many. And I may not be the kind of personality that works with your personality, and that's okay. That's the whole point of having these consultations and these sort of interview processes, is for you to figure out what it is that you want. And so, that's kind of why I say, look, I am very collaborative, meaning um I am the mental health expert in the room, but I'm always going to kind of deflect back to you, like, well, what do you think? Like you're living in this mind and in this body. And so I mean, I've even had, like, going back to what you said too at the training, I've had clients say, well, like, what kind of clients do you see most of the time? Because I think that also paints a picture of who are you working with on a regular basis? Because that kind of gives them an idea of, you know, what is my practice like? Like, what kinds of things am I practicing in my business? And so I think that's also a good question for people to know to ask is like, well, what kind of people are you seeing now?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so important too, because if maybe someone is wanting to work through like grief or loss or
Mm-hmm.
like that, and maybe someone is like is most or that therapist works a lot with people with like anxiety and depression. Those
Mm-hmm.
are areas that could kind of flow in, but
Sure.
if you're
Right.
looking for someone that specifically specializes in that area, or even like life transitions, like that could
Mm-hmm.
flow in, but then that kind of goes
Mm-hmm.
back into the I'm familiar with it. I haven't had that
Right.
training on it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's yeah, such an important part.
Mm-hmm.
So when parents are kind of like seeking you out for just mental health support, either for themselves or for their child or teen or just all of them together, just like an overview of just some kind of strategies that you have given to parents that might be helpful for them to kind of support their child or teen at home and
Mm-hmm.
just facilitate that supportive, kind of open listening environment within their
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thing for parents specifically in and what I really try to gauge in like the first few meetings is what does their community look like, right? Like, do they have other parents that may be walking this life or not? Because I think that can be really hard if you don't, and really, really lonely. And without that community of other parents, kind of going through some similar things, I think that can just make that up. I could give you all the strategies in the world, but it's going to feel really, really hard to do that, I think, without a community. Not that you can't,
right.
but I think I always kind of try to make that a priority of let's try to find a way if you don't have that community of parents for you to connect with, because I think that's so important. Because also they're going to be so much more knowledgeable and also be able to see you in your environment to be able to even give you some actual practical tangible strategies maybe out in the wild, right? Like we can sit in my office and you can tell me play by play what happened, and I we can brainstorm and come up with some ideas. But I mean, isn't it better for a parent that's maybe actually done that, been there, done that, or is in that situation with you that can help you as you're in real time, in real life doing it? So I just find a lot of value in first getting parents connected with other parents that may be going through some similar struggles. And then, with that, just checking in with self-care, right? Like for the parents specifically, like how are you doing in taking care of yourself? And I know community is a big part of that. But if they're not, you know, eating regularly, drinking water, getting sleep, if their home environment is really chaotic and frustrating, all of those basic needs aren't being met, then it's going to be really, really hard to be able to meet those higher emotional needs, not only for themselves, but for their kid or for their family. And so trying to establish where their self care is and how their basic needs are being met, I think is also really, really important. I mean, I think those two things seem really, really basic. But sometimes that's kind of where we have to start is something that seems really basic because those are very like tangible behavioral things, and sometimes I mean that I do think that that's easier to do first than the emotional stuff.
Right, absolutely. And as you're saying this, I doubt I'm the one that pioneered this phrase, but I'm just thinking like you can't build a house without a foundation. And
Totally.
so,
Yeah.
like those two examples or those two strategies and suggestions are the best, I think, especially when you're first starting out with parents, because
Mm-hmm.
I have seen so many times with my families in like the neurodiverse community, it's a very isolating feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Even their own personal families have no idea what they're experiencing. They may kind of just either ignore their loved one because they're like nervous or unsure, or just
Mm-hmm.
kind of, I don't know, just not really seemingly put any effort into getting to know their loved one. So again, that creates even more
Yeah.
isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're in the community, it kind of going with what you were saying too, like you can talk about all of these things, but it'll just like be even more beneficial if you have someone that's there and like around and
Hmm.
with you, which is I think is so crucial, which also aligns with similar views that I have about why parents require like they should be supported and provided guidance because
Yeah.
it's
Oh
like
gosh,
the
yeah.
child or the teen or the adult can work on all these things at a clinic with someone or just talking it
Hmm.
through. Then
Hmm.
when they come home, they need to have that support system. And so,
Yes.
same thing, it's kind of just who can the parents and the family lean on? And if they
Right.
don't have anyone at that moment, then that's when we got to start building that foundation first. And
Hmm.
I know Facebook groups are a great place to find people. There's
Yes.
community boards and coffee shops that have stuff like that going on. So I love that you touched on that because you can't you can't start running like if you don't have
Hmm.
just the
Hmm.
foundation
Hmm.
first. So
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
then the basic needs is so big. I think that like you mentioned they're basic, but they're so easily like and often
Hmm.
overlooked. And
Yeah.
I've seen that so many times in my field, like when working with neurodiverse individuals, like whether it's a kid or like a child or a teen or an adult, if they're having like a really, really, really hard day and then looking at it and saying like, well, when was the last time they ate? When was the last time they
Hmm.
went to the bathroom?
Hmm.
Do we even know how
Yes.
much sleep they had last night? Like, should
Right.
we just be having them in
Totally.
like a darker room? And so sometimes in the moment I was guilty of it. Like I would over like I was just trying to focus on like, well, what's happening right now? Like, why is this happening? But
Hmm.
it's like, well, let's take a few steps back. And
Hmm.
I often had a lot of great mentors that really helped ground me in that. And then so I had that solid, just those are some of the first things that we look at are
Yeah.
like, well, how
Yeah.
is their diet? Like how have they been eating? And
Hmm.
so those, yeah, that was essential. And it oftentimes I think two parents push past their needs to make sure that their
100%.
child is
Yep.
okay, but your child or teen or adult, they're feeding off of your energy. And so
Hmm.
if you're not taking care, it's the you can't pour from an empty cup, truly saying.
Yeah,
Like,
and the whole like on an airplane, you got to put your oxygen mask on
yes.
before. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of analogies. Take care of yourself first.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And again,
yeah.
it's one of those things that's simple and it's like, oh well, like I didn't take care of myself last week and I was fine. It's like I'm just gonna do it this week too. And but
Yes,
that's
and
the
it still
time.
does. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, totally.
And so
Hmm.
yeah, I think they can kind of be some people can think of it as like silly if someone's like, well, have you like had some water recently? Like how are you
Hmm.
feeling? But it's
Hmm.
so true. So I really love that you touched on those things because
Yeah, yeah.
you can't effectively support your loved ones if you're not supported yourself and feel your best. I mean,
Hmm.
and no one's feeling 100% every single day, but doing
No.
our best to be there and making sure that we're doing at least those standard things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could, again, like you could, or I could be giving all of these like wonderful strategies, right? And it might feel really more overwhelming because of all of those basic needs that aren't being met. Or, I mean, I know emotionally speaking, those mental health issues are just magnified whenever the basic needs aren't being met. And so something that you could actually do may feel so hard and so overwhelming just because maybe you didn't eat that day or you didn't get enough sleep. And like you said, kind of going backwards, let's like, why does today feel harder? Or why did this week feel harder? Like, let's talk about those basic things because maybe there's something there that that's solvable, right? Like that's just have a snack, right? Just have a
Yeah.
snack. Let's get a couple more hours of sleep. Like those are things you can do. And those can feel a lot easier than maybe implementing a new strategy or something like that.
Right, right. I love that. And my one of my favorite and I feel like someone told it to me when I first started my company. My company's called Shine, and I have sunflowers behind me. Sunflowers are my favorite flower. I promise
Mm-hmm.
this is relating back to it. I'm not just going off on my favorite flowers in the world. But
No.
I um one of my again, it's I wish I knew the author's name or if someone really did create this quote, but basically just along the lines of like when you start something and you're like putting a lot of work into it, it's going to take some time and you need to let your flowers grow. And so that's kind of been
Mm-hmm.
my just saying that I tell myself, just like as
Yeah.
starting a business and then starting just all of these different adventures, just I've planted my seeds and I need to watch them grow and that's going to take time, but I need to make sure I keep watering them. And I can't just
Mm-hmm.
expect these things to happen if I don't water them and give them sunlight. So it's
Right.
the same thing for
Yes.
parents and like their
Yes.
progress. Um, and improvement like with their relationship with their child or how their child's success like at home and in the community and school like they need to make sure that they are actively watering themselves and giving themselves
Hmm.
sunshine
Hmm.
so that they can continue watering and giving their loved ones
Yes.
sunshine. And
Yes.
so that's also a way that I think is important to view it as well.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so with that, the reason why because I think my purpose behind this kind of series is making sure I can show parents, families, and providers how collaboration is just so essential. And so that's
Hmm.
why I'm so happy to have a connection like you, because when I was first starting like supporting families and neurodiverse individuals, I would have families that did kind of present with some areas that could be better supported by mental health professionals versus
Hmm.
me. I'm not credentialed.
Hmm.
My master's is in something pretty different. And so that's why I just love the collaboration piece. And so
Hmm.
I kind of wanted to touch on like how you collaborate with other professionals, whether it's maybe a child's school system or
Hmm.
maybe a previous mental health therapist they had, or collaborating with just other family members and just their other support systems. And so kind of methods that you have or like you would go about that just to make sure that we're kind of helping the individual in every aspect that we can.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's good first for people to understand that that can happen,
Yes.
right? Because I think sometimes people don't realize and I don't know. I don't know why. Um, so I just want people to hear, like, if you had a therapist and you want your current therapist to talk to them, that is 100%. Like, you're right, first of all, and you can ask for that, and that can happen. So if you need any of your providers to talk to one another, advocate for that for yourself because it is very important and it is going to be helpful to your therapeutic process. So I think first, just making that request known. I mean, because I can't tell you, like, I know I've got clients that had previous therapists, but if I don't know that person, I can't do anything about that.
Right.
Um, but if I do know of a client coming that has worked with somebody or currently is working with another provider, I do want to speak with them because I don't want this person to come to me and it feel very siloed. I don't because you have other providers that you're also getting services from. And
Exactly.
isn't that going to be the best course of action if we're all in the know? If because I mean, and you and I have collaborated, and so you have a completely different perspective on a person than I'm going to because you're doing different things, you're talking about different things versus what I'm doing in my therapy room. So we're not competing. It's
Exactly.
different. It's just a different service. And so we're able to kind of even play off of each other and get information from one another to help our respective corners of that particular client or family or whatever. And so I think as much as possible, I would always want that to happen. It isn't always as possible with everybody. I think with certain providers, a lot of times with doctors, they're a little bit harder to nail down and talk to.
Right.
um, but I think if as a client, if you want that, I think it's important to make that known. And so, just like logistic wise, all that needs to happen is everybody involved needs to sign a consent form. So everybody just knows this is what we do. Everybody signs a consent form, then we can speak to one another. So as long as that paperwork is done and everybody's got each other's information, then that we're all good to go. And I think too, as a client, it's important for you to also maybe communicate to your provider like what are you wanting out of these two providers collaborating, right? Like what is important to you when I call Amber to consult with her, like what's important for you in your growth and in your process for me to talk to her about. Because I think I can ask you all the questions that I think are important, but is that really what they need me to do? So
Right.
and that's kind of, again, goes back to my collaborative process. That's, again, you're the expert of you. And so if you want me to talk to Amber, tell me what it is that is important in that conversation for me to walk away with to be able to help you better.
Yes, I love that. And I've said this on like a previous conversation I had with someone recently, and then I said it this morning too, but my like way of thinking about collaborating is if you have your child or teen or adult and they are receiving services from a mental health provider and an occupational therapist and a speech therapist, and then maybe they're coming to me for just like the parents are coming to
Mm-hmm.
me for some like parent support specialist. When we are all helping. We all most likely are speaking some kind of different language. And so
Yeah.
you might be speaking French and I'm speaking Spanish and someone
Hmm.
else is speaking
Hmm.
German and then someone else is
Right.
speaking um, Portuguese. And so we're all
Hmm.
speaking these different languages. And so that can be way more confusing for that family or that individual
Yes.
or that just that unit as a whole. And so when we're collaborating, we're all kind of just speaking one same language and it's like, okay, this is how you're approaching this situation. Let me start kind of using your words and your way of speaking in that way
Hmm.
because that's been really effective. And so then when we all speak it in that same way,
Yeah.
because it's very challenging for us to expect a child or a teen especially to start generalizing the things that we're working on. If
Hmm.
we all are kind of working on similar things, maybe, but like in a different way, because then
Sure.
that becomes very confusing. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
Candice told me to kind of think of things and process them
Right.
like this, but then Amber said it to do it like this. And so you either halt any progress or it's very,
Hmm.
very slowed down. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, and I love that you also said it's not like we're competing with one another. I I feel like sometimes when people are the experts in their field and they've gone through
Hmm.
years of internships or accruing fieldwork hours and all these things, and they've gone through 2+ years of schooling, it's like, well, I
Hmm.
know this, and like this is all I
Hmm.
need to know. And it's like, well, no.
This is the way we have to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And like this is,
Hmm.
yeah, and this is how I can help you, and how I can help you is the best way. And it's just, as humans, we are so complex and we have all of these needs and all of these different ways of doing things. And so it's so much better to view it as, I don't know if someone would want to say like pieces as of a puzzle or just
Oh
like
yeah.
ingredients to a recipe,
Yeah.
but like we
Right.
are all needed. Like when you want to make a beautiful chocolate chip cookie, you don't just use chocolate
Hmm.
chips. Like you have to make
Hmm.
the whole cookie itself too.
Hmm.
So, um, I love that you're just like your emphasis on collaboration, showing how beneficial it is. I love that
Hmm.
perspective. And then how you said a lot of families and parents don't realize that they have that ability to advocate for
Hmm.
that collaboration.
Yeah.
And you don't know what you don't know. So like if I'm helping a client and I don't know that they're receiving mental health services, or maybe
Right.
I asked and I didn't get an answer back or it was kind of vague,
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you want me to collaborate. And so yeah,
Right.
as
Yeah.
providers, we can do like our due diligence and like asking what other providers are you
Hmm.
seeing and like do you feel comfortable with me doing it, but we can't really get anywhere unless we have that consent form
Yes.
signed and go
Right.
in that way. So I love that you touched on making sure that families know that they can. So
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Well, and even speaking to like what you're saying, I think when we collaborate with other professionals, that's that's going to help me serve that client better. Because again, like you're saying, like you speak one language, I speak another, but I'm going to learn something from how you're maybe approaching a certain problem because
right,
we're probably seeing some of the same problems in our work with that one person. But you're going to take it from one perspective that may be really helpful for me to kind of like, oh, I like that. I'm going to take that and do kind of like a version of that, but in my own way in my work with that
exactly,
person. And if we aren't talking to each other, then we're not going to know that, right? And we're not going to see even that overlap that could be so helpful to one person.
right,
I think it's not that it's absolutely necessary, but God, it's so beautiful when it can happen, and it's
yes,
so helpful to that client when it can happen, and when we can do that well. So yeah, I think advocate for that. I think I think everybody should get all of the professionals that they're working together on the same page.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, so are there any other areas that maybe I didn't touch on that you think are kind of essential for parents to know about mental health or like collaboration that you kind of wanted to share?
Um, well, I want to speak to, I mean, I mentioned this before we hit record. And I told Amber, I was like, I'm not a specialist
Oh, yes, yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yes.
neurodivergent community, but what I've learned and found just in having my business and practicing for 14 plus years is it doesn't mean that somebody with a neurodiverse diagnosis isn't going to walk into my office,
Right.
right? And so, I guess I say this not only to parents but also other professionals, like just because you see some of those signs or just because somebody has that diagnosis, don't be intimidated by that. I think it can feel really scary, especially if you haven't had a lot of experience working with that population. Um, but just get curious, right? Like I think that's the thing that has helped me, is just asking certain questions to see if I can help that person.
Right.
Because yes, they may have an autism diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis or whatever. They may have a diagnosis that falls in that category, but they also may be struggling a lot with anxiety and depression. And I see a lot of people with anxiety and depression, or they may be struggling a lot with relationships. And that is one of my favorite things to do, is work with clients on figuring out healthy relationships. So, you may see that diagnosis come across on that intake form, but they sought you out for a reason,
Yes.
right? And so I think just asking certain questions to see, can I still help this person? Yes, I think we all, like, if you are needing some specialties with that particular diagnosis, then by all means, I'm probably not the right person for you. But I don't want other professionals to get intimidated by that, because I have had plenty of clients that either didn't know they had that diagnosis until we started working together, or they figured it out later on and they just did that on their own. Or I kind of helped them to figure out that that was kind of the next step, that that's where there was a pretty big barrier that was getting in the way of their progress and where they wanted to go in their own mental health journey. That getting that diagnosis and then getting them connected to resources that are going to be helpful to that diagnosis was a way that I was able to help them. And then sometimes that meant they go off and they go see somebody that does specialize in that because that's really what they're needing.
Right.
But I think especially in the mental health field, there are certain diagnoses that in grad school, we would hear about that we would feel really scared and intimidated by, unless that was going to be like where our focus was going. And we did our internship on it and we did a lot of training. And yes, all of that is really good and wonderful. And I don't want to devalue that. But I also don't want, I go back to like the whole reason I started my practice is I want mental health to be accessible. And so if you get that call and they say they have this diagnosis, don't just say, oh, I'm not the person for you because I don't have that area of expertise. Well, find out a little bit more information before you say the no. Because they may not be coming to you for that specifically. They may be coming to you for something that actually you do know a lot about and you do a lot of work with already. And you could be really helpful to them. So I guess I just wanted to touch on that piece for parents, for teenagers, for families. That again, advocating for yourself, asking those questions, um, being clear with what it is that you're expecting out of your work with that mental health therapist, so that they can know how they can help you, and you're kind of able to find the right person for what you're needing.
Yes, and I'm so excited you remember to touch on that. And then while you were saying that too, so you spoke a lot for how providers can still just be open and consider. And then, but in you started like you did touch on it too towards the end, but showing parents that maybe if they seek out a provider and they don't see anywhere on, because a lot of times providers on their website will
Mhm.
have experience in and like quite a few things
Yes,
listed.
right.
And so even if you don't see autism, ADHD, or neurodiversity, you can say like, "Hey, I've done a lot of looking on your profile. I think you would be a perfect match. Like I
Hmm.
myself or like my loved one does have this diagnosis, but I still feel like it would be really beneficial. Like, are you
Hmm.
still open to a conversation?" So kind of addressing it head on and
Yes, that's
saying like,
good.
"This
Yeah,
is what the diagnosis is, but this is what my focus is on." And so
right.
to really just give yourself a larger chance that they will like keep that door
Mhm.
open and
That's good.
listen
Yeah.
before just seeing that those first few diagnoses or just what that is,
Hmm.
just immediately saying I can't do that. So I love how you
Right.
touched on that.
Yeah. 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 And I've had, parents or prospective clients say that, like, I have this diagnosis, but that's not what I'm coming to therapy for. Like
Yes.
I've already got somebody that I'm working with specifically about those particular struggles, but I'm really struggling with anxiety and I need help with that. And so then I can say, oh, absolutely. Like if you're coming to therapy for anxiety, then, I can help you with that. But if there's other struggles that are coming in place, or in play within that I mean, and that's the other part of, like, I just need to be honest too. Like, these are my limitations with
Right.
that. I don't have a lot of experience, or I don't have a lot of training. Not that I don't have clients that don't fall under that category, but I'm not helping them with those particular symptoms. I'm helping them with these others. So yeah, no, I think that's really good to bring that up just for parents to be able to advocate for that too.
Right, right. Yeah, that was so important. I loved that.
Hmm.
I also, you mentioned at the beginning, but I want to plug your podcast because I think it's so
Okay.
awesome. And I think it's helpful for any helping professional. I think it's helpful for any parent, really any individual ever in the world. Um, I
It's the truth.
like just you have a ton of different seasons, so I'd love to like for you to kind of just if you
Yeah.
could touch on those seasons. But the most recent one I can like speak on too because I've just listened to and I've just kind of watched the development of this friendship season. Um,
Hmm.
which kind of like dives into your personal friendships and then going with like firewives and how a friendship in that
Hmm.
community. And then we were talking before we started, but like friendships as therapists. So I love the idea behind this podcast, and I think it gives a deeper insight to both topics and just, I don't know, it just gives deeper insights on, like I
Hmm.
said, yeah, topics and all of those
Yeah.
things. So if you could just kind
Yeah.
of touch on your different
Yeah.
seasons, because I just think that would be a cool resource for other like parents and providers and just
Yeah.
everyone watching to have.
Sure. Yeah. So it's called The Couch Next Door, and the tagline is it's where a happy hour meets a therapy session. And so that's kind of my idea. I listened to therapy podcasts, and I'm sure there's more that I haven't listened to, but I always felt like they were way too scientific and a little bit dry and a little bit like I don't know, it just seemed like too buttoned up. And I'm just not like that. And so I would kind of get bored sometimes listening to. So
Yeah.
I was like, I need something that I wanted to sort of provide a more relatable way for people to get information about mental health topics. And so, I started it May of 2023. So we're going into like year two, almost to year two of it. And so the first couple of seasons were really, just kind of me getting my feet wet and just asking people that had various stories within their mental health to talk about. So, I mean, we've got toxic masculinity. We've got somebody that was diagnosed with borderline personality, betrayal trauma. So, various just mental health topics. Individuals and professionals came on the first two seasons. Then I did a season on the Enneagram, the personality typing system. So, if anybody's interested in the Enneagram, I sort of have our expert Enneagram coach. She breaks down what the Enneagram is. And then I have two individuals of the same Enneagram number that have never met before come on the show and talk about what it's like to be their number. And so that was really fun and interesting to have two strangers of the same personality talk because just watching them like, oh my gosh, you do that, you do that. So that was really fun.
Wow.
Um, and then I had an expert season where I talked to a lot of different experts in the mental health that kind of specialize in a specific topic. And then this season is the friendship season, and Amber's going to be on soon. We've recorded our episode; it's so good. So that'll be on later in the spring. And I really wanted to do a friendship season because it was so interesting in the years I've been a therapist to hear how often struggles in friendship come up in the therapy room. People not being able to keep friends, meet friends as adults. Like, oh my gosh, making friends as adults is so hard. It's such a real thing.
It's really hard.
And it's so common. And and people come in and be like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I don't have any friends. It's like, oh, listen, like you're normal. Like this is
Yes.
a very normal, typical hard thing for people to go through. And so I really wanted to normalize that. And so each episode in the friendship season is like a group of friends, and they tell their story of how they became connected. And and it's people in various lifestyles, various stages of their life. They've met in various ways. And so I just want it to be an encouragement that no matter where you're at, what your stage of life is, where you live, what your season of life is, like you can find community and just to sort of encourage people to be a little bit uncomfortable
Right.
and listen to some of these strategies and tips that people give on how they were able to connect with one another. Because I mean, I think community is so important to our mental health and it makes the hard stuff feel easier. It may not make it easier, but it makes it feel easier. And
Yeah.
so I really want people to feel like they can find friends and that this season of the podcast would encourage them to do that. So,
That is so cool. I love that. That's awesome. And then, so where can people find you? Like, if you could say your website and then any
yeah.
social media.
Yeah. So my website is Candice Fraser LPC, and Fraser is spelled like eraser with an F. So Fraser LPC for licensed professional counselor. I'm also on Instagram at Candice Fraser LPC. And then you can listen to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm everywhere. The couch next door. You can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. So
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much for your time. This was
yeah.
just an awesome conversation. And you're just one of my favorite people to speak to because I just love your perspective. And I feel like I learned something new each time. So, yeah,
Oh,
thank
well, I'm so glad we were able to connect, Amber. You're like so such a resourceful person, and I'm just so glad that we were able to get connected. So I always love talking to you too.
Oh, very cool. Well, yeah. So, thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, see you next time.
Okay.
Bye. Oh, okay. I'm gonna